Check out these two pieces of wood. Can you spot the difference? I couldn't when I first started, but now I'm pretty good at identifying wood. Well, our local species anyways. But what if one of my customers needs to match existing wood panel? Or how about you? Maybe you have an existing project that you have no clue what it is. Maybe you've got a piece of wood that you've never seen before. So I've scoured the internet and compiled a guide so that you'll never have to guess again. Plus, our resident wood expert Joe's got a pretty cool way of identifying wood that I'm sure you haven't heard about yet. You're gonna wanna see this one. Let's go. As you might have seen in the thumbnail before you clicked on the video, there are some species of lumber that look the same as others. It can be confusing. This one is maple and this one is birch. They look pretty similar, don't they? Before we get ahead of ourselves, you need to find out what type of lumber you're looking at. What I mean by that is sometimes we think we're looking at wood, but in fact it's something completely different. For example, some species of fresh cut green lumber looks different than dried lumber. So keep that in mind when trying to match lumber species. Make sure it's real wood and not fake wood too. You can get a good idea if it's real or fake by looking at the sides or the end grain. Things like particle board should be super obvious, but not always. You may also be able to tell by the bark, if there is any. You could try to match the bark to other images on Google and scour the Reddit forums, but that may not be helpful. Customers on Marketplace ask me all the time to send them pictures of lumber, and I usually tell them pictures of wood can be deceiving. Keep in mind the wood you're looking at may be weathered or have a stain on top of it. But make sure you sand or plane the wood surface so you can properly identify the wood species. Now that we know it's actually real wood, whether it's dry or not, and that we ruled out some other factors, let's examine these pieces of wood a little bit further. Let's take a look at every side of the lumber. Here we have the transverse side, or end grain, the radial side, or lengthwise, and the tangential side, across the grain. Keep an eye out for medullary rays, or sometimes called specks, or speckling. All lumber has these rays, but oak has the largest, most visible rays, especially when it's quarter sawn like this. Google says that ash has medullary rays, but I haven't seen them. Perhaps it's because they're too small to see with the naked eye. If it's face sawn lumber, we can look at the radial side or side grain and look for any medullary rays. That way we can determine if it's oak or not. See, some medullary rays right there. Also, if we look at the name on there, it says red oak too. Wood from the center of the tree, called heartwood or juvenile wood, can have different features than wood from the outer portion, called sapwood or mature wood. As you can see with this beautiful piece of walnut, the heartwood is the inner non-living core. It's darker and more decay resistant than sapwood, the outer living portion of the wood. This can make identification trickier when comparing the heartwood of one tree to the sapwood of another without knowing it. Take a look at the color and the luster of the wood. This, along with size and grain pattern, is usually where I start. The overall color of the heartwood and sapwood, as well as any other distinctive sheen, can be helpful clues. But this can be unreliable, especially if you're not confident in what you're looking at. Think of it this way: all wood tends to darken over time and change color. If it sits outside, then it will create a silvery layer of patina on the top layer of wood, also called weathered wood, making it difficult to identify. That's why I told you to plane it or sand it down to reveal the wood's natural color underneath, to properly identify it. Especially if you plan on taking pictures and bombarding your local Facebook group in frustration. So far we've given you some actionable tips that could prove helpful. And we still have our expert Joe to look forward to later. But first, let's get Kendall in here to give us some tips and tricks on identifying wood. It's the same tips that he gave me when I first started at K&J. So I got some pieces of wood here that are very similar, and this is one of the things that people run into, is that they're having trouble with wood that looks the same.
I can tell right away by my experience that this is maple and this is birch. If you look at them, they're not much different. Birch tends to have like the little worm marks in it. The little dark strips, those are like little worm markings. So that's one of the things that is a dead giveaway to me. Another thing is, if you notice, they're both white woods, but the tone is different. Birch is a little more tannish, where maple tends to stay a little more whitish or pinkish white.
And then moving over to the side here, we got some of the heartwood mixed in with some of this hard maple. It's the sugar maple. Keep a note that we can only really identify lumber species that are local here to Minnesota, because we get logs that are harvested within a 30 to 50 mile radius.
Maple can be a really tricky wood because it's a white wood, and that's what everybody knows maple by. But there's also the dark heartwood in the middle. On this side, the maple sapwood's pretty nice and white, but on this side, it's much more duller. I don't know if it's exposed to a lot of light. And here's another thing, is a dead giveaway. Hard maple will get these little woodpecker marks. The only other dead giveaway is that, to be honest with you, hickory also gets those singing woodpecker marks. This is actually what they call a red maple. The red maple, as you see, the heartwood is more of a grayish, whereas on the hard maple, it's a brown almost all the time. We got two different kinds of oak. You can see that the pink one here, it's more pinkish. This would be known as red oak. Then here we have what they call, even though it's brown, like a light tan, it is called white oak. Red oak is very open grain.
A lot of people mix up the ash lumber.
Ash is also a very open grain wood. So ash and oak, you know, if you stain them, you can stain them to look almost exactly alike. Black ash tends to be darker and got a little more color in it, and have some pink hues or purple hues in it. That's a piece of white ash. The heartwood is lighter. It's a lighter kind of tan colored. Where if we compare it to a piece of black ash here, you see the difference in color there quite a bit. Yep, piece of red elm right here. I've been in the wood industry for 20-some years now, but I can mix these two up. It happens. Cherry is a closed grain wood. It's just like the maples. Maples and cherry and walnut are all closed grain. They make really good cutting board material because they don't absorb juices, foodborne things real well. One thing you'll notice about the closed grain woods is that when you sand them, they finish out super smooth.
Kendall's pretty good at identifying wood, and whenever I'm stumped on a piece of wood, I bring it to him and he usually names it off right away. But if you're still stumped like I probably would be, I want to show you a newer way of identifying wood by using the phone in your pocket. See those tiny holes? Those are pores, and they're like the wood's fingerprints. In some lumber species, they're bigger, and in some, they're smaller. Most lumber can be broken down into two main types. Ring-porous woods, sometimes called open grain woods, develop large pores in spring wood to form distinct rings we see in oak, ash, and elm. Early wood or spring wood, and spare me the jokes please. The early wood in oak is lighter in color and has wider open pores because of the water and the nutrients coming up into the tree from rapid growth in the spring. Summer wood or late wood is darker in color and has narrower pores as growth starts to slow down in the late summer, and both make up one growth ring. Diffuse-porous woods have evenly sized pores throughout the growth ring that make it difficult to tell the difference between early wood and late wood. And these growth rings are most notable in maple, birch, and cherry. Semi-ring porous woods like walnut and hickory show a gradual decrease in pore size from spring wood to summer wood. The information about ring and diffuse porous woods are useful because there are apps out there that could tell you the species of a particular piece of wood simply by looking closer at the end grain. One of the apps that I came across requires you to purchase a lens that magnifies the wood's end grain features. This allows the camera on your phone to see finer details and identify the wood based on the pores and the rays. There are apps out there that claim they can identify the wood by scanning the face of the board, but I've never used them, and frankly, I have a hard time trusting. If I were to use my camera to identify a species, I'd use the Google Lens on the Google Chrome app. That feels a little more reliable in my tiny brain. But then again, I've never used any one of those apps to identify wood. And if I needed to identify a piece of wood, I'd just ask Kendall, or our expert and funny guy, Joe. And Joe's coming up pretty soon here with his unique way of identifying wood. And since you don't have your own Joe to rely on, you're gonna have to use your senses. There are other ways of helping you to identify lumber species, other than just relying on your eyes alone. One of the most underrated ways of identifying lumber species is to use your sense of feel. Put your hands on it. Is it coarse or fine? Is it rough or smooth? Can you press your fingernail into it? Is it soft or hard? Take this pine for instance. It's a softwood, it's pretty soft, and I bet you'd be able to get your fingernail into it pretty easily. Whereas with other hardwoods, you wouldn't be able to get your fingernail into it. Be careful though, you don't want to get a splinter. Ow, ow, ow. While it's not really scientific, pressing your thumbnail into a piece of wood can give you a general sense of its hardness. This can be really helpful for quick comparisons on the go. Even though heavier hardwoods tend to be denser and harder, sometimes there are species like yellow pine that are harder than some hardwoods. And that's not yellow pine, by the way. And some hardwoods can be softer than softwoods, but I'm gonna spare you the hardwood versus softwood deception spiel. You probably heard that already in every wood identification video ever. One way experienced woodworkers get to know their wood is by working with it. Aside from using your fingernail, you can take a knife or a hand planer and take some passes, create some curls, and then compare the curls and look at them. I don't have a hand planer, I don't have any of those things, so I can't show you. I can't help you. Sorry. Even take notice of the way your table saw cuts the wood. Does it take longer to cut, or is it pretty quick? Do you notice a trend when cutting into certain woods? The feeling and resistance will become familiar to you, and over time, that'll become very handy in the future. And that brings us to our expert, Joe. This man has been working in the lumber industry his entire life, and he's developed a knack for identifying wood in a way that amazes me still. He uses his nose. I'm sure you're aware that some woods have characteristic odors. We all know that pine is a particularly great smelling wood, along with the aromatic cedar that they use to build cedar chests with, and anything that they need to deter pests from. There are some woods that provide a unique smell that are more subtle to the nose. As our buddy Joe explains how he's developed a skill over the years for identifying wood simply by sniffing, using his nose to identify wood. I know the jokes. The jokes are coming in, man. They're coming in the comment section. Whatever, dude, children. I'll just let Joe explain it to you. Come on in, Joe. So you're able to tell me that you can identify wood by the way it smells, is that correct?
You can.
What is the most smelly wood?
Two bad ones are cottonwood and elm, and the best is the pine and basswood.
Is this something you think you're born with?
Nope.
No? It's gotta be a developed skill, right?
Yep.
How long do you think it takes to develop the skill of being able to identify wood through smelling?
The longer you do it, the better you'll be.
Years. What types of woods smell like other types of woods?
The pines.
Can you describe some of the scents of the most, of some woods?
Yeah, your pines, evergreens that are coniferous. They have the short needle and a long needle, and they all got a real potent smell to them.
How about any other species?
Elm, you can smell that when you cut the log open. Basswood, you can smell that. It's a real flowery smell.
Okay. Is there a way you could smell to tell that it's rotted?
You can shove your nail into it and you'll see that it doesn't take hardly anything. Or you can take another piece of wood and just pop it a little bit and I'll leave a dent.
And do you have a Joe-ism for us today?
Do an interview every once in a while. It'll make you feel pretty good.
As you can see from our conversation here, it takes experience to use your nose to identify wood. Joe reminds me of those pigs that sniff out truffles underground. He's definitely worth his weight in gold around here. But I want to show you some of the things I think about when I'm identifying lumber species, along with what I consider is the most important factor in all of this. We know that wood anatomy can vary even within a species. Things like growing conditions can affect pore size, color, and other features too. Environmental factors can also affect the wood structure. Things like climate, variables in the soil, and competition can also make a difference. Any of these things can affect the trees and form a specialized type of wood in response to the leaning or stress. They can even create cool looking figure in the wood that can throw you off your game. These variations in grain direction and cell structure can make for some pretty cool looking patterns in the lumber. As you can see here, we got a piece of maple that's got some curly figure in it, also known as tiger maple or quilted maple. I don't know if the camera can show it very well, but it's some pretty cool looking figure in the lumber. Also over here in this piece of cherry, it's got probably the most sap pockets Kendall says he's ever seen in a piece of lumber. Look at all those. Usually when people see that right away, they think that's rot. No, that is sap pockets. That is structurally sound, even though it's considered a defect. That piece right there is pretty cheap, but that's probably $5 million for that piece there. $5 million. Inquire with it. That's where we get bird's eye figure and other lumber with curly patterns. And one of my favorites, spalting. Ooh. Fungi are one of the primary causes of wood decay. The heartwood is generally more rot resistant, but that is where we get our spalted lumber. Let me know in the comments section if you want to learn more about spalted lumber, because there's a lot to go over in just this video alone. And of course, it's that very same comment section where I'll get corrected or told that I'm wrong, but that's okay. That's why the comment section was made in the first place, I think. It's the exchange of opinions and ideas that help to make everyone smarter in the end. We can learn from each other and then take it to the workbench. That's where I think you'll gain the most knowledge, is at the workbench or at the lumberyard. The more you observe and compare different species, the easier it gets for you over time. You gotta put your hands on it. Work with the wood that God gave us. Don't. And get used to each wood type.